Hi, I'm Mitchell.
Hi, I'm Jeremy.
And this is
Board Game Battle.
Alright, we're back to distill your arguments and ultimately to crown a winner of the Golden Meeple based on your votes. In case you forgot, our debate was...
Best Stonemaier game.
My champion was what's sitting right here in front of me, this monstrosity of a box, Scythe.
And mine was Wingspan.
Alright, so we're going to throw some comments up there. These first ones are from the official ballot. This person didn't put their name, but they said that they voted for Scythe because of, I think it's supposed to say the 1920s universe plus mechs. Like adding that in, that alternate history. I really like that too. I taught history for 9 years, so I think that's a cool thematic thing to add to it. What else we got?
Yeah, so I got a comment here from Matt. It says Scythe is a much more interesting game. The decisions are more strategic, and expansions make combos endless. Wingspan is good, but the decision space is limited by the available bird cards. It ends up being a game about minor choices, and your turns, if you understand the cost benefit, become simply doing what nets the most points in the final round, which is usually obvious. Most people believe it's lay eggs. That's not always the case, especially with the newer expansions. They allow you to do infinitely more valuable things than just lay eggs for one extra point apiece.
I've noticed a lot of people in the comments that we're about to read will say both games are great, but this one has the edge for this reason. So that you'll see a lot of that. The next one is from Nick Guy. He said that Scythe is a dynamic game with a lot of replayability and an iconic theme. It's more investing as a strategic game. I agree. Probably Jeremy doesn't. Moving right along. This one is from Scythe itself.
Scythe itself, yeah. So it says the engine building in Wingspan isn't so much under your control, also less of an epic feeling, which is what Scythe really shines at without taking too much time. I was actually just talking with Mitchell about this, that I like a game that presents you with a problem, right? All players are presented with the same problem, and then how you go about solving that problem is ultimately what wins you the game, good or bad, right? And Scythe unfortunately doesn't do that. It just gives you a blank starting field and says, okay, now all of you use whatever skill you have in playing this game and go forth, right? So it rewards players who have played the game a lot. Newer players are going to struggle, unfortunately, against people like Mitchell who have played it a lot.
Yeah, and so I think what Jeremy's saying is like that's not a bad thing for a game. It's just not his preference.
No, not at all, yeah.
Yeah. Someone else said about Scythe, they like the theme and there's less randomness. I've gotten a lot of comments on this, again, about the randomness that you see a lot more in Wingspan. Now, here's the thing. There are some random things in Scythe. I just didn't mention them. You know, the combat cards, the encounter tokens, the factory cards, and the territory bonus tiles. However, those things, if they're a bad draw, can't like ruin the whole game for you. It might ruin a moment. Whereas I think is what people mean is with Wingspan, the cards are the driving force between the game.
Right.
Which again is not a bad thing. It adds to replayability, but just in comparing the two, that came up a lot in the comments.
Yeah, absolutely. So this next one here doesn't have a name, so anonymous. Love both Scythe. Love both, but Scythe rewards more in-depth playing due to a lack of randomness. So many strategies in Wingspan can succeed or fail based on birds that appear from the deck. I do agree with this. Sometimes you can just be dealt a poor hand, and it may not work with your play style on Wingspan, right? So, like I said, taking that problem that everybody's presented with and trying to figure out the best way to navigate it. Some players are not equipped to handle a specific play style to get to that end goal, right? And that's just the nature of the game, right? You presented a problem and you got to figure it out.
That makes sense, yeah. This next one is from John. I don't know if this is our buddy John Lanya who's been on the show or another John, whoever you are, thank you. I know there's a lot of Johns out there. He said that Scythe had a deeper player interaction and more world building. I didn't really think about that player interaction aspect, but that's a good point. I mean, Wingspan has some, with you're trying to get these in-round goals, and like you mentioned, the hate drafting.
Right.
But in Scythe, it's kind of more direct sometimes when you're literally attacking people.
Yeah,
so that's true. But some people don't like that. If you don't like take-that games, go for Wingspan.
Yeah, absolutely. This next one, another anonymous. This one just says, not interested in birds. You're heartless. Birds are beautiful. They're majestic, and they tweet. So
yeah, I included this comment because I had mentioned something like it in our video that bird watching is not a theme a hobby I'm interested in, but playing Wingspan is still fun. So just because you don't like the concept of birds, I agree with you. Please still try out Wingspan. And by the way, just a side note, I'm saying I chose a comment. We got a lot of buzz on this video. Thank you guys. We can't get to every single comment, but we do have a lot of them here. The next one said Scythe is a unique game intertwining economy building and combat. The game itself involves very little luck, and your success in the game is dependent on your strategic decisions. I have to sneeze. Excuse me. Yeah, that's kind of like what some people said before. There's little luck, but I argue Wingspan still has a lot of strategic decisions as well, and it's really on you. Honestly, in some ways, I think more so than with Scythe because you have so many more choices to make in Wingspan. I think anyway. It's like you're making these micro decisions, and with Scythe, it's kind of like, okay, this is my plan for the next several turns. Whereas Wingspan, it's like I do this in this turn.
Right. Yeah, comboing different birds together is absolutely crucial. And if you can see, kind of pull back on that picture a little bit while you're playing your turn, you can say, I'm going to do this. That's going to let me do this and this and this and this, and that microcosm becomes the macrocosm of the game.
Yeah. Okay. Next.
Our next comment here, by name Scythe by Far. Okay.
I love how people are embodying Scythe.
Right. They are Scythe. To win the Scythe, you must become the Scythe.
There you go.
Harder to balance the game, and Jamey did a great job. Much more strategy. Little abstract.
I think that means that Wingspan it's harder to balance out because you can get very random draws. But they're saying, regardless, Jamey did a great job just by comparison.
Sure.
Which, again, that's a big thing. Everybody's like, Stonemaier, how am I supposed to pick between these two? This one has a slight edge. All right, moving over to YouTube, we got BJ from Board Game Gumbo. Check out his channel. He said, it's a tough choice. If I have to commit, I'll go with Scythe Span as my favorite. No, Wingth is my choice. BJ, you're such a troll. I guess I have to say Scythe because even after 5 years, my blood still starts pumping every time with excitement. We start that game and still love it. But I'll happily play Wingspan and all of his incredible expansion content any day. BJ, it was with you and David and Sarah and maybe Aaron that I learned Scythe many years ago at Anubis, our friendly local game store. So thank you for introducing me to Scythe. Moving on.
All right. So our next comment, Velderak. Comparing these games is tough since I love both of them. They're so different in their gameplay, though, that it is tough to say one is better than the other because each one does in its genre
Each one does in its genre,
yes.
In my opinion, the best.
The best, yes. But by comparison, the best Stonemaier game, so I've got to pick Scythe. The gameplay is so much more fun to figure out, especially as everyone else at the table is trying to do the same. The only randomness comes from the cards, but even then, I feel like they add a dash of unexpected that doesn't completely imbalance the experience. You can make the argument that some factions are innately better than others, but honestly, the caliber of players I play with don't take the game seriously enough to strengthen certain factions that the strengths certain factions possess defeat the fun that I had in the end. To be 100% clear, Wingspan is a phenomenal game, but Scythe holds a special place in my heart that few games occupy. To that point, right? We said here that there's less randomness. Yeah, it's only in the cards. I got to point out the boards are all switched up.
That's true.
That's a piece of randomness. You kind of have to learn that board real quickly at the beginning of the game, or you're going to fall behind a couple turns in.
I think all Scythe players will agree that some factions are innately better than others. That is true. With Wingspan, yes, it's clear that some cards are better than others, I would say, but it's not like you're stuck with that one for the whole game.
Right.
Which some of the Scythe expansions actually say. I don't remember the exact mechanics because we don't use them, but it's a variant where you can choose your faction. I prefer just luck of the draw and see what you can do, but there is that option with Scythe. All right, now we're moving to some Facebook comments. Stephen Duncan said, I have trouble wanting to try Wingspan because it just doesn't seem like it's for me. Again, don't let the theme turn you off. Still a great game. That being said, the artwork looks amazing. Scythe is one of my favorite games to play. I have 2 boys, 10 and 12, loving it now also. That's awesome that you have kids at that age playing Scythe. Because a lot of people have said that if you're more of an entry-level gamer, go for Wingspan. Otherwise, go for Scythe. So that's cool. Keep teaching those youngins.
Sure. We got another comment here from Jane Lyons. Love Wingspan, but the winner has got to be Scythe. Hands down. I guess in this case you mean wings down.
Oh, gosh. Moving on from that. Leokesh Sentisteven. I know I said that wrong. I'm so sorry. Scythe definitely, even though the games are completely different, both are well made and honed up well enough in the ever-changing hobby. That's a good point. These are 2 very different games. Honestly, the only thing that ties them together is that they're both from Stonemaier, and so that makes it a little bit harder.
Yeah, so our next one here is Collier Deaton. I love both. Wingspan gets played more because it's way less intimidating to newbies, and it's fun for newbies and experienced gamers. I like Scythe more, but Wingspan is a better game for the majority, in my opinion. Gotta agree. Scythe is... I took a long time to play Scythe because it looks so daunting. Once you actually get into the game and you learn the mechanics, it's fairly straightforward. It's not as complicated as it looks. It just has a big table presence. Wingspan, on the other hand, it's about birds. You lay eggs, you play birds, they eat food. It's pretty straightforward. Most of the learning and the mechanics is read the card.
Jesse, I'm not even going to try the last name, said, finally got around to playing Wingspan for the first time last week. So timely. video, and despite my reservations and thinking I wouldn't enjoy it based on watching gameplay, I actually did enjoy it. I still like Scythe a bit better though, but I do like how Wingspan takes less time to play and feels smoother. That's a big point. So Jamey Stegmaier actually released like reports of how many copies of each game had been printed, and Wingspan by far is their most printed game. I think it's so successful because it's just right in that entry level that it's accessible to a lot of people. It's definitely more accessible. And kind of you get more bang for your buck. I guess you could say I have friends that are like, yeah, I could play Scythe or I could play 2 games of Wingspan at the same time in the same amount of time. Right. So what do you value on your game night time, right?
Yeah, so definitely Scythe is one of those games that even at 3 players, it could take, an hour and a half to 2 hours, maybe even 3 hours if you're planning strategically and you got a little bit of AP with trying to decide where you want to go. Wingspan, I mean, the record time I've seen me and my wife play a game is 28 minutes, and that's us knowing what we're doing, placing birds, placing eggs, getting the food we need, and done. But I can play 2 or 3 games of Wingspan in a night. I could play 1 game of Scythe.
Mm-hmm. So. I mean, unless you're going extra hard like we do sometimes.
Sure.
We could get multiples in.
Sure.
But again, it's usually something we only play one of. Unless I'm playing with like 2 people, then it'll be pretty quick. Someone who knows how to play it, we might do more than 1. But yeah. Ho Yun Kim, again, sorry for that butchering of the pronunciation. If you're closer to a serious gamer, probably Scythe. If you're more of a casual gamer, probably Wingspan. That's kind of what a lot of these comments have been saying.
Right.
But seriously, even if measured in any other criteria, both games are pretty good games. Yeah, I was looking on BGG, the rankings. Scythe is the highest rated Stonemaier game. Wingspan is not far behind, and it's just like decimal points separating them. So they're both great games. I agree.
Next one, Dennis Arthur Antle. For best Stonemaier game, shouldn't we be listing all of them? Yeah, I agree. We should be listing all of them, but it's a board game battle, and so we're doing 2 games against each other.
And he said, like, what's the best ice cream, vanilla or pistachio? Now, here's the thing. I don't like either of those types, but I understand where you're coming from. You're right. These last 2 I think I'm going to put together just because they're basically saying the same thing, but I appreciate you guys' comments. Paulo Mendez said, I love both, but my number 1 is Scythe. And Michael Langford said, Scythe, best board game ever. And I did comment on Paulo's and say, are you talking about number 1 of these 2 or number 1 of all time? Both these people are saying Scythe is their number 1 game of all time, so that's pretty cool. Now, thank you for participating in the debate. That's why we read those out, and sorry if we didn't get to your comment. So now we got to find out who's going to win the Golden Meeple, and for that we have a very special guest. So over to our guest, can you please announce the winner?
Hey, this is Jamey from Stonemaier Games. I published both of these games, and I'd like to announce the winner of the debate is Scythe.
Thank you so much for announcing that for us, Jamey. I'll leave the Golden Meeple right there. Better luck next time, Jeremy. It'll stay with me for right now. But the big news, what you guys are probably watching this video for, is because of that special guest right here, Mr. Jamey Stegmaier. Thanks so much for being here today, Jamey.
Yeah, I thank you for inviting me. This is quite an honor that you guys would talk about these games on your channel.
Oh yeah, it was hard because whenever I'm debating against a game, I mean, I'm an Omni gamer. I'll play a lot of things, but whenever I'm debating against a game, I usually like to pick one that I don't like as much, but there are so many Stonemaier games that I love so much, so it was hard. And so please don't take it the wrong way that we champion each a different game. We like both games. It's just one for each of us has a little bit more of an edge.
Sure.
So the first question we want to ask, we know that you had a role in both of these games, obviously, but can you talk a little bit about what your roles were in Scythe versus with Wingspan?
Yeah, definitely different roles for these 2. For Scythe, I was the designer and the publisher. I'm the publisher for both of them, so I won't go into that, but I was the designer for Scythe. It was about a year-long process of me working with the artist and world builder Jakub Rozalski to bring that game to life as the designer. And then for Wingspan was designed by Elizabeth Hargrave, wonderful designer, and I served as the developer for that game. So I kind of worked with her not throughout the process. After she had completed the initial design process, I worked with her after that to develop it, to make the game as fun and balanced and intuitive and to add a sense of progression to the game. So that was my role for Wingspan.
Okay, so if you don't mind my asking, so I know what the difference between developing and designing is, but like, for example, the new arts and architecture expansion for Tapestry, which should be getting to my door today, hopefully. I'm very excited about it. So you're the co-designer on that, correct?
Yes.
How does your role differ as a co-designer versus as a developer, and how do you distinguish between, so like, why were you not a co-designer on Wingspan like you were for that?
I consider like the design part of the process to be, you come up with the idea, you prototype it, you play test it locally, you change it a bit, you continue to play test it until the game is playable and functional and somewhat fun. And that's the game design portion of the process. And you can do that alone. Elizabeth did that part of the process alone, or you can do it with somebody else. And so for the Tapestry Arts and Architecture expansion, Mike Young is just a fan of Tapestry who happened to post some of the ideas that he had play tested a little bit, but they were mostly just ideas at that point. He posted them on Board Game Geek. I found those ideas and I reached out to Mike. I really liked those ideas. And I reached out to him and said, hey, do you want to work on this together? And so from very early on in the process, Mike and I were working on the design, just building that design part of the game, like what the game or what the expansion actually is together, rather than me coming in later as a developer and saying, hey, I love what you have. Here are some things that I'd like to do to make it even better.
Can you tell us about what the state of Wingspan was when it came to you? Like what kind of things changed from whenever she brought it to you to the final product?
So my co-founder and I, Alan, sat down at Gen Con, I think it was 2016, with designer Elizabeth Hargrave. And at the time, she had a bunch of bird cards that were really well designed. The birds were, the theme of each bird was really tied well to the mechanisms of that bird. That's what drew me to the game in the first place. But at the time, the whole point of the game was to play, I believe it was like 8 or 10 birds. You tried to play 8 or 10 birds as fast as possible. There was no player mat. You were just kind of gathering some food tokens and playing birds. And that was it. Some of the birds had abilities, but there was no sense of progression in the game. Like you weren't building you weren't making actions stronger. You weren't stringing together an engine of different birds that work together. And so that was one of the things that I helped out with during the development process. I helped Elizabeth create this concept of a player mat where you're improving the strength of each of your actions and activating these lines of birds and triggering their abilities together, which for me is one of the great satisfactions of Wingspan, along with collecting this array of really well-designed bird cards that she created.
That's cool. So yeah, it sounds like there was definitely a lot added in the development process.
Yeah.
So we were talking earlier, these are, from the statistics you put out, your 2 biggest sellers of all time, right? Wingspan, more so than Scythe, but Scythe slightly higher rated on BGG. Did you expect both of these games to kind of jump ahead so far of what you had already published?
No, I mean, both were wonderful surprises. In some ways, I mean, I knew that I really enjoyed the games, but I never know how well a game that I enjoy will actually sell well, or how it will be received by people. So yeah, I'm elated that both games have sold so well and hopefully brought a lot of joy to people around the world.
It definitely brought joy to our tables. You want to ask your question about what he prefers of the two?
Yeah. So kind of obviously picking between your 2 children, right? Between the 2 games, what is your choice?
It is really, really tough to make that choice. I think for me, especially when I sit down with one of my games, or one of our games, one of the games that I publish, my focus is on the person that I'm playing with. I want them to have a good time. That's the case with any game, right? When we sit down with people, but especially for the games that I publish. And so if I'm sitting down with someone who, like, I'll see if someone is more intrigued by one of the themes over the other. If someone's really excited about the Scythe theme, I'll play Scythe. Wingspan, if they're excited about birds, I'll go for birds. If they have no preference there, I will look at probably their experience as a gamer. Do they want a game? Are they a little less experienced? I think Wingspan is a great way to onboard someone into modern hobby gaming. It isn't a gateway game exactly, but the actions are so simply laid out on the table that I can get anyone into a game of Wingspan, even if they don't fully comprehend it until halfway through the game. Whereas Scythe, while I did try to design it to make it pretty easy to teach, there's a lot going on. It's a 32-page rule book. And so I might hold that for maybe a slightly more experienced gamer. Have you guys had success showing these games to different types of people?
Yeah. I think we have a kind of a larger game group. And so Scythe is, I would say it probably hits the table more, but it's harder with more players if they haven't played before. And we were talking about that earlier. It's kind of like bang for your buck. Do you want to get a long game of Scythe in or potentially 2 games of Wingspan, and
Right.
kind of how you budget your time on a game night?
Right. Yeah. My wife and I will play 2 to 3 games of Wingspan back to back because she can't stand to have me beat her more than once.
Yeah, so like we predicted, it's kind of hard for you to pick. In terms of designing versus developing, or designing only versus developing, do you have a preference as to do one or the other?
I've learned, I mean, a common thread for me is that I like variety. I like a little bit of both. And so if I was only designing games, I'd probably get tired of that after a while. If I was only developing games, I'd probably have that creative itch to design my own. But because I get a mix of the two, and it's almost balanced out to, like, every year we publish around 2 games. Typically one of them is one that I design. The other is one that I help develop. I really, really enjoy the mix of the two. So Yeah, I would say at this point, I'm surprised by how much I love development. I didn't anticipate that going into starting Stonemaier games, but I do love that a lot more than I thought. But I wouldn't want to give up design either. I like both.
Is there one that's harder than the other?
I design, I think, is harder.
Yeah.
I'm working on a game right now where even just getting the game into a functional, fun state has taken way longer than I thought it would. Whereas we got a game submission a few weeks ago that was already really good because the designer had already put that work into getting the game to that place, and already we're entering blind playtesting on it because it was the submission itself was so good.
I imagine the big challenge with development is almost like interpersonal skills, right? It's their baby, and you're trying to tweak it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a really great observation because one of the things that we do with a new designer is I'll throw some feedback at them, and it is essentially I mean, I want to give them the feedback, but also it's essentially a test to see how they reply to that feedback. I don't want a designer who says no to everything. I think that would be a problem to work with someone who just says no outright to everything. And I also don't want a designer who says yes to everything. I want them to feel comfortable pushing back a little bit and saying, no, I've tried that. I've play tested this idea that you had. It doesn't work. Here's the reason. Let's not do that. I want a mix of those two things. And you're right. I'm going to correspond with this person a lot, mostly over email, but some over voice chat, things like that. And I want to make sure that I actually get along with them. So that I am looking at that from like the very first few interactions with the designer.
I like that answer. I guess kind of to wrap it up, I don't want to take too much of your time. So you kind of, from what I get, and to be expected, you kind of can't pick a winner out of these two, and that's fine. That's fine. I get it. I can't pick a winner out of my two children, for example. I guess a way to close, maybe me and Jeremy can each pose what one of our counter arguments were for one over the other, and if you could give your counter to that counter, just to, your thoughts. You want to go first? Pick one of the counter arguments that you put in our video.
Sure. So I think that one of the big ones that a lot of people have with Wingspan is random.
No, with
With
about Scythe.
Okay,
Yeah,
you want me to do yours?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay,
Continue
so
your debate about why Wingspan was better for you than Scythe.
My big thing with Scythe was the fact that the player boards are different for each player. We actually had a conversation before this where I was talking about how there's a difference between two games that start you at 0, and you go from there. It's skill based, right? If you're good at the game, if you know the mechanics of the game, and you optimize a strategy for winning, you're going to win. And new players coming in, it's not so easy for them. Wingspan presents both players with the exact same problem at the beginning of the game and says, "What's your solution to this problem?" And it can be wildly different, but you could see a different winner depending on that strategy.
So I think you're saying Wingspan is more symmetric than
Right.
asymmetric.
So Scythe has a very asymmetric starting board for each player. Even your location and placement on the board is different, and it takes a second. When you look at your board and you see that your things are out of order from your normal placement, you have to figure out, okay, well, how best am I going to optimize this board as opposed to the one that my neighbor's using?
Yeah, it's a different type of puzzle. With asymmetric games, you're exactly how you just said. You're trying to figure out for this specific setup that I have, how can I optimize this? How can I do the best with this specific setup? And Wingspan is, there are other puzzles that come from Wingspan. Because there is asymmetry in Wingspan too, based on like the starting birds that you get. That can influence the puzzle, but right away you kind of have this shared asymmetry. What birds are coming out in the middle of the table that anyone can grab, and which bird do you have to actually go after there? And I think this is a weird example because both of these games are highly replayable in my opinion. And Scythe, I think, is replayable largely because of the asymmetry. Wingspan is replayable because of the sheer number of bird cards in the game. And so I would normally say that asymmetry is good for replayability, but Wingspan covers that as well. So I agree with I completely agree with what you're saying there.
Yeah, I agree. I like asymmetric games. That's something. And again, yes, Wingspan is asymmetric, but this. That's a pro to me, and for him, I think it's a little bit more of a con.
Yeah,
but
little too asymmetric in my opinion. Wingspan, it starts off level set for everybody. This one, you start at 0 with complete asymmetry at that point, right? And I get that the different actions that you have are the same. They're just in different spots, right? They match up with different bottom actions,
but different costs and benefits. So
right.
Okay, my one counter I'll bring up. So for Wingspan, I'm a guy. I'm mechanics over theme every day, but I mentioned this in our video. Bird watching is not like my big passion in real life, and I've learned through playing Wingspan that that's okay. I can still enjoy the game. But what would you say to people who maybe see like birds, like that's not super exciting, not like mechs, to get them to try the game?
Here's what I would say, especially to gamers about it. I think there's something in most gamers where we get excited about collecting things, whether it's our shelf of games, whether it's, I don't know, we all probably have some weird collection from our childhood that we got really excited about. Just, pulling out that pile of, I had like little turtle sculptures for some reason. I don't really care about turtle sculptures anymore, but as a kid, it was like whenever I could get like one little turtle miniature, I was really excited about it. And I think Wingspan taps into that little desire in all of us as gamers that we have as collectors, because you're collecting this array of something. And I don't think that something matters all that much, but the art in Wingspan helps, I think, make it a little beautiful when it's in front of you. You can look down at those birds at the end of the table and you feel a sense of, or at least I feel a sense of pride that I have collected this thing that hopefully worked together pretty well. Can you guys relate to that at all? That collector's aspect of gamers?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, no,
definitely. That's a
absolutely.
great way to explain it, actually. That was a great answer.
Very much so, very much so. Yeah, no. I have a shelf, and for me, it's a visual aspect, right? Everything's alphabetized, everything's vertically stored, and it's just like these games go with these games. So I get that. I get that.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. Thank you so much for being here, Jamey. Anybody watching out there, order the Arts and Architecture expansion for Tapestry. I'm so pumped. As a theater teacher, the fact that we have an arts track makes me super excited. Oh, yeah. Show it off.
Yeah, here's the new expansion.
I'm waiting for it to be delivered today, so I'm excited.
Awesome. And thank you guys for hosting this debate. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I know they're older games, but they're still good ones. I know everybody's wanting to make videos, I'm sure, right now about your Tapestry expansion, but we wanted to talk about some of our favorites for right now, and I'm sure we'll have Tapestry on at some point too. So thank you so much for your time, Jamey, and thanks for designing great games that we're big Stonemaier fans. I'll play any of these any day.
I just ordered a copy of Viticulture.
Awesome. Thank you both. I appreciate that, Jeremy Mitchell. Have a good day.
You
Take
too.
care.
Board Game Battle.